that it cut off. Now, I should probably preface this by saying that I'm not sure which one, because somehow since this video cut off early, I'm not. It seemed like it almost half registered. It's very weird. It's coming up. It's coming up now in my photo bank, although it's not coming up in my uploads to my computer. But it looks as though, at any rate, and this is the case before it came up with on my photo bank, and it's the case still, now that it has come up on my photo bank, that I'm registering 419 videos, or photos I should say, including videos, as I understand it, in my photo bank right now on my phone. And this trips me out to no end, because that means that either this or that, depending on whether or not it was registered in the final count, is number 420 of all my photos. And this is really significant if you're familiar with the mystical implications, especially in the drug culture and the shamanic culture of that number. And it trips me out further because I had only yesterday published one of my best and most and one of my most confident blogs, and I found out after the fact that the blog entry is actually my 420th entry in this. So if the number does take my last video into consideration, that makes that video 419, so that makes this one video 420. And if it hadn't, and it just has a moment to do so, just as it has a moment to register on my computer, I should hope, if it makes its way in, then that one was then that video was 420, because it just hasn't yet registered in the system. So this makes this video 421, but I think you should pretty much see it as one video anyway. So that's a synchronicity right there. Let's go back and let me just continue where I left off. Now, what I was saying is, this is what we do in the scientific epistemology. We take something mystical, shamanic, much like synchronicity itself, and if we can't fit it into the scientific frame of reference, we exclude it, and we invent something like Fourier's effect, right? But if we can, we monopolize it, and we say, oh, there's nothing mystical about it at all, it's just chemistry. And they just stumbled upon it by chance over thousands of years, because they've been on the scene long enough. But we know through our very recent theory of evolution that, which is really kind of silly if you think about it, just to say that, that, they naturally developed it. It wasn't symptomatic of any kind of mystical intelligence on their part, because they're no better than plants who evolve over time. And really, at the root of it, though, we, with our very recent scientific frame of reference, and our recent leaps and our modernity, can actually make sense of it, right? Much better than they can. We can mass produce it through our technology and so on and so forth. And this is what science does. It either excludes all mystical and pre-civilized phenomena as insane, or it monopolizes them. And this is where things relate back to health. Because this whole notion of health is based on how much of medicine we can control. And to scientifize health is to say, now we have knowledge of this because we can control it. And so now that we've established that as being kind of pretentious, to presume our knowledge to be binding upon the world, rather than just symptomatic of just our limited understanding or limited control of something which is predominantly outside of our control, which shouldn't be regarded as something submissive to us, but something greater than us. Let's look at some hypocrisies and some dangers, some social dangers, in taking this attitude to an extreme of claiming scientific certainty and idealizing that as though it were moral superiority. First of all, like I said, we don't have a vested interest in survival, really. A number of people smoke, a number of people drink. And think about what you do when you drink. You're ingesting poison which has been fermented over time, much like a yogurt. Think about what you do when you drink yogurt. This is probiotic. It's the opposite of antibiotic. You are exposing yourself to small organisms. But you deem this to be healthy when it works in your favor, when you feel good about it. And it's anyone's guess what feels good. To some people, taking heroin feels good, and you might argue that they're stupid for doing this. And in fact, I might even agree with you about that. I might say, look, people shouldn't do methamphetamine because it makes them dangerous. But at what point is this taken to an extreme? You know, Michel Foucault deliberately supposedly got the AIDS virus, at least that's how the narrative runs, and gave it to a bunch of people. And he had a long elaboration on why he did this. Now, did he deliberately go out of his way to get it, or did he allow himself to get it? Arguably, there's no difference between whether you volitionally got it or you accidentally got it. I think probably this is where we got this whole subculture of people who don't refer to it as HIV, but refer to it as the gift. Because obviously, if you're marginalized as a group, you know, homosexuals or whatever, and people say, look, you're subversive to society. You know, no, it's okay. It's not your fault. But this virus is your virus, so we have to stifle it. You might come back and say, well, fuck you. This virus is a gift. This isn't a curse. It might kill us, but everything kills us. Life itself and all the conditions of life are conducive to death. And it's only because, and this whole notion of what is a causal factor in death is only the result of this hegemony, the same that says, look, it's not shamanism, it's chemistry. Or otherwise it's just blind luck, it has nothing to do with anything. We're more than happy to dismiss it as coincidence there, but we don't think of it as coincidence when people get better through medications. And usually medications, especially in like the psychiatric community, for one thing, no one knows how they work. And secondly, there's no evidence that they work. They stifle symptoms on the part of the individual subjectively. So the individual says, oh yeah, I feel better, so people ignore that individual. But are they really as effective as just your organism as changing things, or do they stifle the symptoms? We don't know, but we presume that they do, and we force them onto people. Look at the history of the notion of mental illness. Mental illness originally was supposed to mean an illness which doesn't have a physical cause. It's as distinct from physical illness as software is distinct from hardware. And we've been treating mental ill, but when psychiatry got its hands on it, and there was money in the psychiatric department to be made, and these are people incidentally who developed heroin. I mean, the reason that the term is called heroin is because it was marketed as something that's supposed to save you from morphine addiction. And these are the same people who are trying to force immunization shots now. Well, the reason for this is big pharma, right? I mean, that's not a superstition. It's big pharmaceutical corporations. So now we treat mental illness as a physical illness, which is much like saying, I'm going to fix a virus on my computer by tinkering with the hardware. That's not how it works. You have to work with the software. You can't fix a mind from the outside in. You have to help the individual to overcome one's neuroses through understanding the neurosis. And you develop an antivirus, right? And this is viruses in respect to computers. Arguably, you might say, well, immunization is an antivirus, right? That's the whole notion there. But notice, of course, we call these things computer viruses because of our hatred of viruses. We might as well call, it's circular reasoning. We might as well call them computer neuroses. I mean, you say, look, we should... look, your arguments, someone dogmatic I have in mind right now might say, look, your argument's circular or contradictory, which is funny because usually when things are not contradictory, they're circular, right? Actually, either is fine, but look, you might say, hey, viruses, you claim to be against viruses and you claim to advocate for antiviruses, but wait a moment now, isn't that what immunity is? I'm like saying, look, that's a circular argument. Because you define, and we define these things, we do, as viruses because we hate on viruses. And you're saying we should hate on viruses because of how we've defined it. I'm just communicating because I have to meet you halfway. I would really much rather call them computer neuroses. Now let's look at some of the dangers of this, and then finally I'll get to the benefits of illness. And I might run out of footage in a moment, so forgive me. One of the dangers of this is conformism, and this is a big hypocrisy on the mass level. So, look, I say if you want to be healthy and you have a standard for what health is, and it's going to be particular to you, to how you want to conduct your diet, how you want to perceive your world, what your religious views are, and atheism is a religious view. It depends so much upon negating religious dogmas that you have to kind of buy into those being the only conception of God available in order to be an atheist, right? Because God, by definition, many views, stands outside of those dogmas, so you can't negate it. At least not absolutely. Anyway, the whole the whole thing is that health is personalized, and therefore, but consumerism mass produces it until people catch on that health is personalized. If you feel smoking's good for your health, you should smoke, and if other people don't like it, they can go outside, or you can find a way of mediating it, whatever seems fair in a given context. If you think that drinking's good for your health, and you're not a danger to others, you can drink. There's a distinction, as Alan Watts pointed out, between an alcoholic and a problem drinker, and it's chiefly social. So if survival matters to you, have at it. But don't develop this herd immunity bullshit. That's just literally the herd mentality. It's the same mentality that says, well, that person doesn't agree with us, that person's crazy, or that person's Jewish, that person practices a different religion, that person's from a different background, or that person's a heretic, and we don't feel comfortable, we don't feel stable in this, so we need this person to conform to know that we're good. And frankly put, it's subjective. Just like all science is subjective, and it reflects your biases, your confirmation biases, how you interpret things. Theoretically, if you can conceive of your organism as a separate organism, separate from the herd, if you get sick, that's your fault. It's not the fault of the people who are carrying the virus. It's not the fault of the virus, it's the fault of your immune system. Or you might say it's the fault of the virus, fine. But it's arbitrary when you blame the person carrying the virus, especially since you yourself are now carrying the virus. You yourself are now susceptible to the virus. Oh, you made all the efforts necessary to prevent that virus, but still now you're guilty of it, as much as any other carrier. The question is, ought that to be prevented if prevention of that means that everyone has to participate in it? And consider the degree of statistical evidence that these things can actually harm you, that they can cause brain malfunctions and cysts, and now not only do you suffer socially or intellectually in some way, but you're also sequestered from the community. So now you're in a different social class anyway. We can't even say that the brain cyst itself led to the harm, led directly to your social malfunctions. No, you were literally set apart from the community. Naturally, you're going to see things in a different way. But, it's quite possible, though. It's quite possible that it's both. The thing is, it's just as theoretically possible as a theoretical possibility that immunization shots work. And when people talk about herd immunity, it's actually speaking from insecurity. It's saying, look, you can get a shot and still get sick. What do? Oh, you certainly don't admit that maybe this isn't 100% effective. No, you blame the other people for it. And then supposing everyone had the immunization shot and someone else got sick, you'll pretend it's a different disease. Because really, the world, the physical world doesn't give a damn about human beings' neurotic notions about what health is. God doesn't create these things to be separate viruses. God doesn't refer to them necessarily as Ebola. If you don't believe in a God, all the less reason to believe in this logocentric notion of this invisible logos that created Ebola, or whatever, or Satan that created Ebola. What differentiates Ebola from other viruses? Well, we have this outbreak over here, and it looks kind of like an Ebola. Oh, that doesn't look like a paramecium, looks like an Ebola, right? And for the most part, we can identify it. But, I participated in things like Science Olympiad, where you're supposed to identify fossils or bugs, and some years I did really well, other years I did really poorly. That's because how I classified things as a Echinodermata or Chordata or whatever didn't accord with the official classification. Well, who says the official classification's right? Scientists are just as subjective as anyone else, and if you've been doing it for a long time, well, that's fine. But my psychiatrist was doing psychiatry for a long time, and I still think he was a dick. I mean, he had to admit that he didn't know what was wrong with me because I didn't meet any of the categories of that reason created for madness. I was so crazy that they couldn't even make sense of me. So I just left. I'm like, no, I'm not going to take these meds anymore. Because, like, even you can't even invent an illness to describe who I am. And if you did, it would probably be called Andreev disorder or something. It would make my parents embarrassed. Or Dmitri disorder. Well, why not just say, I am the disorder? It's not separate from me, it's a part of me. And this leads me to my last point, the benefits of being sick. In the medieval times, which is arguably where we got our notions of what science is, I mean, Occam's razor, hell, Sir William of Ockham was a medieval philosopher. Alchemy was the origin of chemistry and science and all these things. I believe that was also the time we started dissections, though I'm not sure. At least in the West. We had this notion that